Coming up on this week's Redcast.
I think when digitization comes along, you will see quite a significant collapse of a lot of what we've seen as traditional compliance in the way you describe. And all of that will get automated. All the kind of, normal case processes and quite a lot of the investigation and reporting and compliance will be really about interpreting what all that means for the organization.
Clients are asking us, the market is asking us for uniformity, that controls need to work independent, agnostic to location. And that's difficult. Lexicons and policies have limited utility for a compliance person to try to see where the issue is. And so we're seeing an acceleration of NLP and machine learning as a way to kind of sift through all this disparate data. We've seen the benefits organizationally in how these tools work. And number two, a lot of these technologies are reflecting a changing face of our business, a changing face of our employees and our clients. The market is moving in this direction, regardless, with or without the pandemic and the work from home scenario. It's like we are becoming digitized in the way that we get things done.
Christmas 2022 compliance, I would wish for them some empowerment. It's been a long time coming. We've been talking about raising the profile and the clout of the compliance department for a long time. And if they're going to deal with the issues that are revealed when the tide goes back out and deal with some of the other challenges of the hybrid working, they are going to need to get some respect and have people listening to them.
Welcome to Redcast.
Where we shine a light on banking digitization.
Welcome to the last Redcast of 2021. This is our 20th episode, and we're really pleased to be bringing you this spotlight today with a great lineup. We're incredibly proud to have had to cast our light so wide and so deep this year. We've covered democratized markets, surveillance, the central bank digital currencies. We've gotten into regulatory reporting, trade associations, domain models, horizon scanning, the cloud, AI and data, all that great stuff. Throughout, there's been a history of controls and the question about, well, how well do we do them? And at our conference, there was a lot of discussion, a lot of very interesting polling, and I encourage you all to kind of go check in with the conference site still. But the big problem is we really can't sleep well at night with the current way we engineer controls. And I think there's something here we want to talk about with this panel about what it is that's going to enable the board to be able to sleep better at night. Now, regulators are clearly putting the impetus on firms to fix the control problem. We've seen hundreds of millions of fines. It is regulatory reporting, but it's a lot more than that. And I think, as Rachel has pointed out earlier, it's just another invitation, a bit of a red rag to the supervisor if you don't have your controls in order. But this really isn't easy. There's an awful lot out there to control, and there are many ways we have done it historically with thousands of people involved. We've argued you need joined up thinking, you need to be hooking directly to the regulatory requirements and having a golden source backbone for all of your controls across the organization. However, you need really to get buy-in to a model-based control culture. And by that, we mean you need to be able to think about the domain that your business operates in, and then how that applies to the way you do business and what it is that people do. So it's not something for shifty AI salesmen. This is something that the firms really need to stay on top of and do in the right kind of way. So without further ado, I would like our panelists to please introduce themselves, starting with Gavin.
Hi, I'm Gavin Stewart. I'm a director, Grant Thornton Financial Services Group. And before I was there, I was a regulator for 27 years with the bank, FSA, and Financial Conduct Authority.
Thanks very much. Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel Wolcott. I'm a senior editor at Thomson Reuters Reg Intelligence. I've been covering EMIR from the very beginning, and that's been keeping me going for like the last 8 years. And now we're finally getting towards some kind of digital regulatory reporting solution that's hopefully coming, right, PJ?
It sure is, Rachel. Thank you. Robert
Cruz, VP of Governance and Risk for Smarsh. Our technology and our firm is focused on providing electronic communication controls that govern the way that companies can capture, store, analyze, and respond to regulatory inquiries, e-discovery, investigation. Very happy to join you.
Thanks very much, Robert. So I'm going to turn to the big question, and then we'll go to Gavin. What is the future of regulatory controls? And Gavin, you've been at this for a really long time and helped set some of the expectations in the UK around something called the senior manager regime. Could you spell out a bit how that is meant to work?
Yeah, sure. So the senior manager regime came in post-financial crisis, so that was the origin of it. And it's really about making sure that it's clear who is accountable for what in a regulated firm. So all the activities and all the functions, once you're past a certain size, need to be divvied up across your senior managers as designated, and they need to be approved by the regulator. So when it comes to compliance, as a compliance, senior manager position, but actually they have to interact with everyone else, and I think that's really the sort of the kind of the key of the whole thing. And once you get into the digital world, you've got horizontal functions coming across, and how does the horizontal interact with the more traditional top-down vertical view of the firm, which the regulators started out with when they introduced this regime, when they came up with this regime nearly 10 years ago now.
And this is just a regime for the UK and a few of the other jurisdictions. It's not something for the US and Europe yet, right?
That's right, although various other jurisdictions have come up with their own versions of it.
Okay, so we have a global overlay, slightly different requirement, but at the end of the day, the direction of travel around controls is being able then to evidence that in a digital way that everything is being covered by somebody.
Yes, and I think it came from the fact that no senior manager was prosecuted by the regulators as a result of the crisis. So other jurisdictions may not perceive that they've got such an acute problem as the UK did post 2009. Yeah.
And maybe just a second there on what we call in our industry this wonderful lines of defense model. And what do you think is really happening with that, and especially now they're all working from home and we've had to go through a COVID crisis after the financial crisis regulation?
Oh, how long have you got? I think everyone's still trying to work it out a bit. I mean, I think there's a general, the regulators are generally relieved at how well all of that has worked through the crisis, but inevitably it won't all have worked well. So there'll be, I suspect, quite a big wash up. And as the kind of tide flows out again, various things will be uncovered, and we'll find that out. But I think it's very much an iterative process with the whole working from home thing. I think the regulators will look for where do we see really good practice, and then they'll use that essentially as a kind of highest common denominator to start leveling the rest up.
So the tide will pull back. We'll see some yucky stuff on the beach. Yep. And we'll have to go there.
Inevitable.
Make sure we're doing this right. What regulations have been introduced in the past couple of years that you think will help drive the uncovering of these yucky patches and needing to do something most?
So, well, you've seen the expansion of the senior manager regime. So both before the COVID crisis and during it, the regulators have become increasingly keen, I think, to kind of create a hook every time they have a new initiative for it to be the responsibility of a senior manager. So that's kind of one thing. You've got a general, I think with the crisis, you've got a drilling down on both the prudential and the conduct side, looking for both more granularity in terms of what firms can tell you about their compliance, and also more flexibility in terms of, we asked this question yesterday, but actually now this has happened, so we've got a different question and we expect you to know the answer to that. And I think that's one of the things that will drive change and modernization, if you like, across the whole kind of set of compliance functions.
Yeah, so today, let's unpick that a tiny bit before we go to Robert on this, because I think this is the key. A lot of these controls are put together by people. there's lots of MI and
Yeah.
people that sit in control functions that have to manage lots of spreadsheets and produce pretty reports, right? I mean, what do you see happening to that model within firms right now?
So we've had this conversation a number of times over the last few years. I think when digitization comes along, you will see quite a significant collapse of a lot of what we've seen as traditional compliance in the way you describe. And all of that will get automated. All the kind of, normal case processes and quite a lot of the investigation and reporting and compliance will be really about interpreting what all that means for the organization. But it hasn't happened yet. At some point it will. And I think we will probably get to the point where the regulators will have to start mandating it. Because I think actually the upfront cost is quite significant. And unless the regulators take the initiative on it, it's going to take too long and we'll fall over ourselves again.
That's fantastic perspective. Robert, let's take that into your realm. Explain to us a bit then what's the real ask that you're getting around the need for better systems and controls?
Yeah, it's a great question. And clearly the lens we look through is around the unstructured side, the communications information, how you're engaging with the public or how you're working internally. So we're not as much focused on the operational or the transactional aspects, but really the ask is, given digitization and given the remote work scenario, is the controls need to work uniformly. They need to work regardless of where an individual may happen to be located. I think just perhaps even unintentionally, controls were defined with a specific location that was kind of predetermined, individual interacting with someone else over an approved communication vehicle. That's gone. So today your client may be on a mobile device talking to a registered representative or other employee who is in an office. Your compliance staff may be working at home, and this conversation may be taking place on Zoom, or it could be taking place on some other digital communication network. So regardless of all the permutations and combinations, clients are asking us, the market is asking us for uniformity, that controls need to work independent, agnostic to location. And that's difficult because the technologies don't work that way. And I think the technologies are going to continue to be ahead of where some of the explicit regulatory guidance is coming from. So that's the challenge of firms needing to stay ahead of location while regulations are updated to reflect the way that individuals are communicating and collaborating today.
So in a gross simplification, the people that used to be able to oversee and stitch this information together now have been separated, and we need to find ways to get the technology to help it pull it back together.
Exactly. And at the very minimum, you have a visibility problem. It's much more difficult to understand what individuals are doing when they happen to be on the beach in Lake Tahoe, getting their job done. So it's just the visibility challenge of knowing what individuals are up to. And I think also that the additional complication of just understanding from a data privacy perspective, what is that line between their personal time, their business time? How do you separate the communications that pertain to your business that are required to maintain for a regulatory obligation versus the things individuals are doing on their own time? So both things are complex, both the location, the choice of a particular tool, as well as whether they are actually doing business on behalf of the firm or doing stuff, while they're snorkeling at Lake Tahoe.
Yeah, that's a real problem, right? Because that was, the whole point of these controls and the structures, the way they were designed, were to be able to protect the information flow, so you didn't have things crossing back and forth. But part of the thing that was never really part of the design was this personal overflow into professional.
Absolutely. And just before the pandemic, you already had kind of like this conflict between, think about the way Zoom works or Microsoft Teams. You may not know who the 500 people are on a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting. And some of these individuals do have specific regulations attached to them. So just the way that collaboration technology works can create more complexity around how a firm needs to think about controlling aspects of that communication that are mandated by your record keeping obligations.
Yeah. So where do you come out then on what this all means for the compliance technology stack? if there is such a thing. The old argument of centralized versus decentralized doesn't really seem to quite fit, but there are all kinds of privacy and ethics issues involved here. So what are some of the key strategic technology decisions?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think, we often look at this as, all these communication tools exist because they're enabling companies to get their jobs done. They're enabling you to interact with a client on the terms that they're familiar with and comfortable with. The problem that's created is that you now are not just, from a regulatory or compliance perspective, looking for a needle in the haystack. You now have multiple haystacks, some of which are better organized than others, to help you find that needle. And that needle could potentially jump between haystacks. A conversation with a client could have started on a collaborative network, moved to a mobile device, and ended up on WeChat. So you have to have the agility to be able to look and see where that communication has gone. So the problem is that managing this with individual silos of data is not sustainable. We have large clients that have 70, 80, 100 different communication sources that they've approved for use. You can use these things to conduct business. Some in other regions, depending upon privacy and locality requirements. But the challenge is for an individual human to try to understand and decipher, where did this conversation go? Who said what to whom, when it's on one network and has emojis and has encoded videos and such. This is really driving the acceleration of the notion of bringing things into a single pane of glass so that I can see an aggregate view, but also the recognition that lexicons and policies have limited utility for a compliance person to try to see where the issue is. And so we're seeing an acceleration of NLP and machine learning as a way to kind of sift through all this disparate data. But I think companies are just starting to realize this as the volume of Teams and Zoom communications has exploded. Companies are now seeing this on the compliance desk, or the lawyers are seeing this for discovery. It's like you're now having to track through historical data that is very heterogeneous, and individuals have limits on how well they can process this.
Yeah. So Rachel, what I'm hearing is that there's a real centralized drive in what the ask of technology is now is get me one giant haystack, or at least a way to connect my haystacks. And obviously that's going to create a whole different way of thinking about applying compliance, the NLP, the modeling, the looking for exceptions, creating a whole different set of issues. Are we going too far or too fast with all this from your point of view?
Well, I guess it depends what kind of communications that you're recording and storing. So do you need to be recording and storing everything that your employee does working from home or whilst on the road? Probably not. So I think on the one hand, we've got the trade surveillance type technology, which requires also recording any kind of client interaction where they're selling or making recommendations, giving advice. You need to be recording that. Do you need to be monitoring how many hours your workforce is sitting at their desk tapping on their keyboard? Do you need to be having recording every single call between employees? No, you don't. And I think that that you have to draw a line. And Robert referred to this, saying that you need to be able to distinguish between what's happening in an employee's personal life and what's happening in their work life. And, it's not the employee's fault that there's a pandemic going on and that the lines between work and home and pretty much everything is just blurred and confusing these days. Am I supposed to go into work today, or am I doing a Zoom meeting? What's going on here? I think what firms need to do, instead of running around with their hair on fire, worrying about employees misbehaving at home, is show their employees that they are trusted. And if you don't trust your employees, then you need to be asking yourself, why did you hire these people in the first place? And while there's been this huge technology response to the pandemic, I think good old-fashioned training and kind of people management. I know I've talked about this before on this podcast, having human to human contact. This is something Gavin and I have talked about before. If you want to find out what's actually happening, you need to ask. You can't just spend, hours and hours and a lot of processing time sifting through their emails looking for a needle in a haystack. You need to have set your people up to do the right thing in the first place, and you have to have managers who are able to communicate what their expectations are in terms of conduct, and really set the tone.
And so that's a great point about the way one thinks about using this haystack. We have an ability to pull the haystack together, but I think where you're coming at it is senior management and the second line of defense need to think about the appropriate way then to intervene in what it tells them.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, how do you have we've seen demos of firms that say we can profile your employees and predict if they're going to misbehave. I think that's a terrible idea. How do you have a conversation with somebody that says, oh, so our computer says that you're going to do something wrong in a month. I mean, I'm sure they don't work exactly like that, but that's crazy. And in fact, police forces in the United States have used predictive policing technology. And what winds up happening is they go knock on somebody's door and say, we know you're going to be bad because you hang out with bad people. And that just casts a pall on people's lives. And you're not going to have camaraderie and have a good workplace atmosphere, whether that's in a dispersed environment or in the office, if people think they're being watched all the time, and people think, oh, if I screw up, the computer's going to catch me. What if it misinterprets what I do? I think that's going to just bring a lot more anxiety into the workplace at a time where everybody's got plenty of anxiety. They don't need it anymore.
I think that's a great point. Gavin, I see you nodding and smiling alternately as Rachel speaks. What's your view here?
Well, apart from the Minority Report bit, I think, there's a really interesting line to navigate that I think everyone, certainly regulators, are feeling their way along of between the kind of the personal and the professional. And I think, there are lots of different legislative regimes that come into this beyond financial services regulation. I really don't know the answer. I think it's fascinating. I do get disturbed about the idea of everything you do in your own house being somehow recorded and stored and so on. That feels like a dangerous path to go down. But clearly, you need to be able to track the important stuff. So I think it's a real challenge for compliance and systems and financial services firms generally to work out how you do that.
Robert, let's come back for a second again. What's the business case for investing in the technology you're talking about? How is it getting justified?
You know what? That's a great question, and I'm glad you covered that, because I think a lot of the times we discuss control aspects, it's about mitigation of risk or managing costs. But I think the mentality has to move from pandemic thinking of this is the only way we could get our jobs done. We didn't have a choice other than to engage on Zoom or Teams. I think what a lot of firms we talk to experience and realize is that they were actually getting their jobs done. They were actually more responsive. They were actually more productive, getting answers back to clients or conducting meetings over Zoom. It worked. So I think you see companies moving forward into this hybrid scenario, realizing that the genie's not going to go back in the bottle. There's benefits to the business, not only in terms of your productivity and agility, but also just one other very important consideration. is that a lot of these new technologies that we see being brought into the workplace that are crossing the line between personal and business are being brought by people that are comfortable with these technologies. They're digital natives. This is what they grew up with. We see TikTok and Instagram and Reddit and all these other communication tools now entering in because this is the way that people choose to engage. I can send a message to my son on email, and I'll never get a response. But I'll send him a text, and it's instantaneous. It's like boing, it's immediate. He's back to me. So I think the business case is number one. We've seen the benefits organizationally in how these tools work, and number two, a lot of these technologies are reflecting a changing face of our business, a changing face of our employees and our clients. The market is moving in this direction, regardless, with or without the pandemic and the work from home scenario. It's like we are becoming digitized in the way that we get things done. So there is benefit in responding to the market, and leveraging these tools when it's appropriate, when these tools are the right tools to be used for the business, where you can implement the controls, that give compliance and other stakeholders the comfort that they can manage the risk.
And it feels to me like when I look at the reports and analysis saying, 80% of the top tier firms are adopting these kind of technologies within the next couple of years. We'll be over that tipping point of them having the capability. But the question then becomes, what does good look like in terms of deploying it?
Yes.
And where is that fine line? And I think I guess there is a risk that going into 2022, let's imagine we don't have an issue with the virus, and we do get back more into the office, and the water does recede, and we look at what's on the beach, and we see this mangled haystack. There's a risk we could start now seizing on this and say, oh, wait a minute, we really need to be careful what we're doing here. But I guess that's the big thing then about next year's agenda. And I guess I'd like to then turn the question back to Rachel and say, what's your 2022 Christmas wish for compliance? In other words, put ourselves a year ahead. What do you think we really need to be focused on?
So for Christmas 2022 compliance, I would wish for them some empowerment. It's been a long time coming. We've been talking about raising the profile and the clout of the compliance department for a long time. And if they're going to deal with the issues that are revealed when the tide goes back out, and deal with some of the other challenges of the hybrid working, they are going to need to get some respect and have people listening to them. And I think they also can empower themselves to not be afraid of technology, but to embrace it to make their lives easier. Maybe they should empower themselves to get off of the PDFs, static documents and Excel spreadsheets, and move into digital formats, like some of the digital policy platforms that are coming, exploring digital rule books. It's something that the Abu Dhabi regulator has just been doing a lot of work on, and seeing how they can make their lives easier. Now, is this going to make them all lose their jobs? No, because as Gavin was saying, somebody's going to have to make sense of all this stuff. Somebody's going to have to be doing the training. Somebody is going to have to be investigating and following up. And I would hope that this would then give them a lot more time to dig into problems, spot things earlier, and be able to do something about it, which again, they need to be empowered. People need to listen to and respond to compliance and try to have a better relationship with them. I think that that's just still a problem. And do you want to be a firm that's happy paying $1.5 billion a year in fines just to the United States regulators? Or do you want to be a firm that's, able to reduce that and make a better culture where people on the first line of defense are thinking about compliance as part of and parcel of doing their job? And I think that's what some of the digital tools could help them to do.
That's great, Rachel. Thank you. Gavin, how do you come at this?
Right. So again, I'll come at it from a kind of, regulator's point of view. And I think that regulators tend, when they're designing something, they think about the policy and what they want to do, and then they think about how that's going to be complied with. And I suppose my Christmas present is for them to reverse that. So they start thinking about right up front about how are we going to help compliance functions oversee all of this as they're designing the policy. So it's very much kind of front and center of their thinking all the way through. So it's kind of front end rather than back end.
Fantastic. So we have a regulatory Christmas view. We have a business Christmas view. Robert, what's your perspective?
Well, with all due respect to Gavin, I would love to have under the tree updated regulatory guidance that is prescriptive and gives firms clear direction on how they should be managing these digital communication tools. I don't think that gift is coming this year. So, maybe the present is firms recognizing and the compliance teams realizing their importance in the overall food chain of how information is managed by their companies. Because getting the compliance teams to yes for the business means that you're looking at the risks of these communication tools and saying, yes, I feel like I have the technology, the policies, and the training to be able to manage it. That's unleashing this as an asset to the company. As we talked about, it's like a lot of these things are happening because it's creating greater agility and responsiveness and alignment to the needs of your market. So helping them to recognize by getting them happy, by being comfortable, they're enabling and unleashing information to the organization that's going to drive top line growth. And we're starting to see that from some of the larger firms. So they play a vital role. And my Christmas wish is that more recognize that that's what the decision is they're faced with is, enabling their company to do things that they weren't previously able to do.
Well, I think that's a fantastic set of perspectives. I hear one that's very much focused on the business as usual of compliance trying to get reoriented. I hear one about the regulators getting a different perspective, and I think one that's somewhere in the middle there. My hope is that we actually get collaborative across the three, involving the vendors in the definition of what does a good model look like, because it's not going to happen by itself. We're going to have lots of independent models, and one thing that we've learned this year is it takes a lot of work to get agreement on what a common domain can look like and how to make sure everybody's in the loop and has their say about how you get a trusted view of what it is these systems need to be doing. And then that's what frees up the humans. So once we can get the businesses to understand the new driving experience, then the engine will get itself sorted out. But we really next year are going to focus on, let's stop talking about how great the engine is or how much more data fuel we need, and what comes out if we do these, if we make all these investments in the new way we want to digitize the financial services industry. So thank you very, very much, ladies and gentlemen. It has been an honor to do this Redcast and do the last 19 and the conference as well. So please make sure you're checking in and back frequently, and we will be with you again early in the new year.
You can download the podcast via Spotify, Apple, and Google. But also, I'd encourage people to come to the JWG website, which, as hopefully you will know, is jwg-it.eu. Go to the Intelligence Hub and create your bespoke library. This is Redcast,
where we shine a light on banking digitization.